Everybody, sorry this video is a bit late, but life took me along a different path and actually gave me a few good ideas for here in my fourth video. So I'm actually really glad I waited, because the material for this video is going to be really good, and I went through a lot of effort to get this one ready. So it's going to be a good one, and I hope you guys enjoy it. So, as always, I want to start by saying that this is in fact my perspective, and I only present it in order to share something new with you, in the hopes that you get something out of it, and it may incite you to strike up a debate against my own beliefs. It may challenge your own beliefs. So, as always, to any who provide some feedback, I thank you. And to those who take it to heart, I also thank you, because you're listening with an open mind, which also relates to today's topic. So, today's topic in general is going to be discussing my views on institutionalized religion, I'll briefly touch on the tools of their trade, which are the religious texts, and a couple other things I'll very quickly touch on. But I am going to be using a lot of the Christian Bible to help draw points, and then I will be using a number of generalities from that as well. But in particular, this one has my focus. It's one that I've spent a number of years studying since I grew up in that Catholic household, so it's something I can go back and reference very easily, and that I'm very confident in how I'm connecting these dots. So, that being said, here we go. Now, institutionalized religion. I'm going to start off by saying I do not see them as bad things. I do, however, think that in order for us as a species to further ourselves even quicker, I think we need to strip these institutions down and remove them from our culture. Not just any single culture, but all kinds of institutions across the entire planet. And I say this because they're becoming a crutch for for hundreds and thousands and possibly even in the millions of people who simply use them to provide quick, easy answers, and they're taking them exactly as they're being presented to them, and they're not thinking about them at all. And this causes people to be what I would refer to as mindless sheepwalkers. Now, as a point of clarity, I am not saying the faiths themselves should be removed, but I have another point to make on those later. But the faiths themselves are not what I have the problem with. It's the institution as a whole saying, this is the one correct answer, and you must believe in this. That's the part I have a problem with. And I understand that not all institutions say that. I understand that all religions do not teach that. And I'm clarifying that now, so that way later on I can make those generalities and I don't have to correct myself. So, in fact, to give some credit to people, the greatest minds and arguments that I have heard for any single faith have in fact been people who somewhat differ on what the institution says that the faith should be. And I've talked to many priests, many holy men, even just general people who follow any specific faith. And it's very easy to cut to shreds any argument that's presented in one exact perspective. But the people who have wrestled with those tough questions of faith, who have gone through their own journeys and are absolutely convinced that they are on the correct path and they have the correct faith, they put forth the best and most passionate arguments I have ever heard. And those are the ones that are an incredible credit to their faith. And to those people, I thank you very much, because you're doing exactly what you should be doing, and you're amazing people, and I thank you for that. But again, it's those people who mindlessly follow what they've been presented with and do not think about it or interpret it for themselves. That's the part I have a problem with. But to move on a bit further, I want to continue by stating the difference between spirituality and religion. Now, we are all spiritual, in my perspective, and whether we acknowledge it or not, you're still spiritual. Spirituality, as I define it, is that part of our belief system that defines how we relate to the unknown. It is that part of ourselves that tell us how exactly we relate to that which we can't explain, and that provides us with a perspective and an explanation on that mystery of existence. And that's the part that's very, very beautiful about it. And for you atheists or agnostics out there, I do in fact say you are spiritual. You are just on a path. You are just on the other extreme of the path rather than fully giving into everything faith, which I think is wrong. You're on the other end of the spectrum that says, I require 100% definite proof in order to believe this. And I think both extremes are flawed. Valid in their own right, and they do have their purposes, and they are part of the natural cycle of things. But those of you who solely stick with that state, that you're not on a very good path, and I think you should start looking deeper and deeper into what exactly these different religions are teaching and what exactly their core message is, because I think you're missing quite a bit. And to those who subscribe to the sole purpose of science, I'll tell you this, a number of the most prominent scientists in the world are, in fact, in some way, shape, or form, religious. Now, again, also they are intrinsically spiritual, but they also have some kind of conception of what exactly God is. And for them, it doesn't contradict at all what they're doing with science. And I don't see any contradiction with it either. In fact, I truly believe that the future of our entire culture is going to be a fusion between spiritual beliefs and scientific concepts. Because when we have both a proper explanation for that unknown and for finding those paths that are our life journey, our purpose in life, those explanations for existence, and we combine it with the empirical knowledge that we have, the definite knowledge of how exactly things work in this reality, we get a whole and very practical perspective on everything. And that's currently where I stand, is a fusion between the two. And they don't have to contradict at all. There might be some things that one explains better than the other, which is why you put them together. Because when you put them together, you get the whole picture. So, to continue onward, religion, as I define it, is the institution that defines that there is a set way to believe and a set way to go about living your life. Again, there isn't a problem with, I don't see anything intrinsically wrong with it, because it does in fact provide people with structure, comfort to tough questions, and alleviates a lot of the effort involved with having to dig through all these different faiths and pull out all those different beliefs, and it is a lot simpler just to conscribe to one faith. But that does not, however, mean that you should be following it blindly. And I'm not trying to say at all that everybody does. There's just a big group of people that do, and these people very much irritate me. Another big point of that is a lot of institutions don't teach acceptance of other religions. And in fact, if they do teach anything, it's a tolerating of other religions. But because you're tolerating it, you're just kind of, when you tolerate something, you're simply saying, okay, it exists, but I can't do anything about it, but I still don't like it, so it's over there. When you accept and understand other ideas in their own inherent right, then you'll truly see the wisdom and the beauty and the message within them. And at that point, it's not tolerating it, because then there's no really negative aspect to it. You see it for what exactly it is. And it becomes something so much more to you at that point. But again, that path of tolerating other faiths is a tricky path that will lead you to closed-mindedness. And it will cause you to lose all the validity and the wisdom in all those other different faiths. So, now, the institution themselves came about by the demand of the people. If we look in particular in the origins of the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian faith, they were absolutely requested to be put there. People did, well, going back all the way back to into the history of things, thousands of years ago, people were lost and praying to various gods for whatever purposes they needed. If you needed, a god for your crops to grow, you went to the statue maker, he gave you an idol for the correct god, and off you went. And then you would pay tribute to that idol, and then it was gods and statues for fertility, for smiting your enemies, for any number of things. But then everything was disjumbled and there was no organization whatsoever. It was just whatever you needed, here's an idol, there's your god, off you go. And not only was this very confusing, no structure, but then this also got very expensive because now you have to pay tribute to 12 different gods so you can live a whole life, and it just wasn't a way to go about things. Which that's intrinsically what made monotheism so popular, was because when you had this God of Abraham, who all of a sudden it was just this one God that controlled everything. Well, now you only have one God you need to pray to, one God you need to please, and that makes things so much simpler. So, as the monotheism built, it started building questions. So, how exactly do we properly go about serving this God? How do we make him happy? And then that starts getting into how exactly people are supposed to live their lives. But even back then, it still retained that concept of, we now have the one God. He is stronger than all your other gods. Watch his divine power. And in a lot of ways, it was still, our God is better than your God. And I feel like that idea hasn't fully gotten out of our system, so to speak, in us as a whole, as a species. And a lot of people still conscribe to this idea, which I think is very foolish. But we fast forward a bit. The faith has built a lot. People recognize this God of Abraham as being a strong source of divine energy, and the religion built and became something very, very big. But before I go any further, I want to stop and look in particular at the 10 Commandments that were set unto Moses and discuss just exactly what I think they mean, because I don't think you absolutely have to obey all 10, but I think they're 10 pretty advisable steps for how to live a proper life and to avoid a lot of different typical mishaps and struggles that you can experience. So, also as a point of clarity, understand I'm going to be quoting a number of religious passages and texts, and I want you guys to keep in mind that these are also translated versions, and that they don't actually hold their original meaning. It may be close, but there's just expressions and ways of saying things in other languages that doesn't translate. And some of that original meaning and concept is lost in the translation, and that's just a part of the process. But keep that in mind when you're reading any religious text in anything but its original language, because unless it's in the absolute original language, there's going to be a little bit of information loss. So, off we go to the 10 Commandments. First, I'm the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. One God, one Creator. Don't go around worshiping all these other crazy gods that everybody else is saying you need to pray to for, the crops, the sun, the moon, fertility, anything. Don't pray to them, because that's nonsense. That seemed like pretty sound advice for the time to me. Number 2, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God. Don't worship these idols, and don't create the idols, and don't worship them. Again, going back to that idea of where everybody was going around making these different idols, creating these different gods to pray to, etc., it eliminates that problem entirely, and it gets people on a structured and consistent path. Number 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Don't use the name of God to claim your horrid acts. They are yours alone. Don't say it's God that's making me do this, or I'm doing this horrible act as this embodiment of God. That's on you. That I see as using his name in any way, shape, or form that is not that pure and divine light. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. God, if you into the Genesis pattern, and there's some sacred geometry arguments for this as well. The 7 days of creation, 6 steps for creation, and then the 7th day of rest. If God can take a day off to simply sit back, relax, and just enjoy all that is, so can you. And I think this was a very important point to keep. And it says that on the Sabbath day you should use it to praise God and serve Him, but I don't necessarily think that means that you absolutely have to go to church or you absolutely have to go and pray to Him. I think that means that whatever path it is that truly is the path of your existence, when you, at the very least on that 7th day of the week, you take it off to simply exist to your fullest potential, then that is how you inherently serve God. That is the nature of that. And it's a reminder that you don't need to always give in to the process of survival. Take a day off, relax, enjoy existence. You wouldn't exist if you weren't at the very least meant to enjoy it a bit, at least in my belief. That's number 4. Number 5, honor your father and your mother. Seems like an easy enough one. It says nothing about having to like your parents. Again, especially in this up-and-coming generation, I know a lot of us have parental issues, and a number of those things are coming to light. But that doesn't mean you should disrespect your parents or dishonor them in any way, shape, or form. Because no matter what you do, they are what brought you into this world. They are your point of origin in this existence. And in that sense, you should honor them in whatever way works best for you. And again, it doesn't say you have to like them, but you absolutely have to love them. You absolutely have to honor where you came from by being the best you that you can be. And I feel like that's the way to go about it. And when you do that, any issues that you guys might have are going to disappear, and you'll find that you find the balance in how to go about that. Number 6, you shall not murder. Seems pretty straightforward to me, and any war that's ever been claimed in the name of God directly goes against these commandments, because it's breaking that one right off the bat. And in fact, I think when you murder, especially if you do it in the name of God, you're violating 2, because it says you shall not take the Lord's name in vain, and any who commit any kind of act like that in His name are breaking 2 of the commandments. So you're doubly wrong, buddy. Number 7, you shall not commit adultery. Be loyal to your spouse. If you're with them, be with them. Maintain that relationship. Don't violate the trust of it. Don't violate the sanctity of it. And I mean, we see that a lot in our society today. All kinds of people cheating on each other, running around, having all sorts of different flings. Again, I don't see a problem in it, but when you take it all the way to a vice, it will always have problems, and it's just very definitive structure. I think is a very easy end-all way to go about it. So again, it's valid in its own right. You shall not commit adultery. Done. Number 8, you shall not steal. Don't take what's not yours. Easy enough. If it doesn't belong to you, you shouldn't be taking it. And it's simple as that. 9, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Don't lie to get the other guy that you don't like in trouble. That's not right. It's, in a number of ways, a twofold thing. It's don't lie, and then don't go out of your way to ruin somebody else. It's just not right in any way, shape, or form. And it causes a lot of... It's a very negative act, and it breaks and disharmonizes a lot of things, and I think it's something that's just absolutely wrong, and I just can't stand people who take it that far as to intentionally bear false witness to anybody. It's just horrid. So, that's number 9. Again, very straightforward. Number 10, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Again, we don't have servants today, but it's that point of that's that person's existence. That is what they have. That is not what you have. Don't covet it. Don't be jealous of it. Don't. You can absolutely desire that level of wealth and existence, but don't be jealous of it. Don't resent the other person because they have it and you don't. Because for whatever path they have, that is what they have. And you should absolutely treasure what exactly it is that you have, because that path and that existence is only yours, and you have as much as you need. And when the time comes for you to have more of an abundance than other times, then it will come, and that will be the time where you're the one in that position, and then maybe somebody else might look at you. And when you get jealous of other people's things, you covet it, then that leads to stuff like bearing false witness, leads to stuff such as murder and theft. Again, very structured guidelines with very much a much higher level of thinking and intent put over them. So those are the 10 Commandments. I think they are, even in today's society, still very valid, and they hold a lot of wisdom in them. And there's nothing intrinsically wrong with them. Again, outdated definitions for some things, I believe, but that doesn't ruin the validity or the message of them. So, moving on. I'm going to quote Acts 13:21. Then they asked for a king, and God gave them Saul, the son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, for 40 years. Keep this passage in mind, because it goes back to that idea of, again, people asking for that leader, asking for that structure. They asked for it, and that's what they got. So that's how it continued. That was the people's choice to have that, so it was what was given to them. So, again, I don't blame the institutions for their own existence, because it's not their fault they existed. People wanted it. People still want it, which is why they exist. So then continuing on, after they have this king, this leader, leader after leader, some making mistakes, some being absolutely amazing, lessons were learned, paths were shown that do and don't work, people reaped rewards of God's good graces, and other people suffered because they chose the wrong path. But all of it was a learning process, and the stories were recorded so that the further generations could learn on the mistakes of the previous. And even if you don't, I don't personally take anything in any religious text as absolute factual evidence for anything, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have historical qualities to it. That doesn't mean there's not a bit of historical accuracy to it. I just don't think it's a 100% accurate interpretation, and anybody who thinks so, I think, is very foolish. But the reason they were documented was so that those lessons could be learned, and they could serve a purpose. Even the bad stories that describe these horrible acts are still recorded, so they could be learned from, and the mistakes of the past wouldn't be repeated, because people could look back and say, look at what he did, we shouldn't do that. But even though it was a negative act in and of itself, it serves a positive outcome when people can use it as a counter-example to what they do or don't want to exist in. And in fact, Saul, who is their first king, ends up being both. He ends up being a positive example for a little while, and then he goes negative. But again, it's stuff to be learned from. Fast forwarding again to the time of Christ. The religion is very much structured. It resembles a lot more of what it is today. Not exactly, but it has the religious leaders giving guidance on how to properly live your life, official religious texts with all their recorded history and the exact definitions of things that they needed, and records of old. They have places of worship, etc., etc. So, to quote Matthew 5:17, "Do not misunderstand why I have come. I did not come to abolish the law of Moses or the writings of the prophets. No, I came to accomplish their purpose." Matthew 5:20, "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." Now, I love this particular passage because in 2 hits, it describes Christ's purpose, and then it gives his core message to the people. Christ came to provide a new interpretation, to fulfill these laws of old. He's not here to get rid of them, but provide a fresh new take. And that fresh new take puts a lot of responsibility on the individuals. Because he tells them flat out, "For I tell you that unless your own righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees, surpasses that of your religious teachers, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." Which puts a lot of personal responsibility on these individuals to live their lives to whatever potential it is that they have. And it not only tells them that they have to do that, but in a double whammy, it tells them that they can do that. You know, he wouldn't have brought the message if people couldn't do it. And he points out to people their potential, that you absolutely can do it, but that's the high level that you have to get to. Because to achieve, and I do in fact believe this, that to achieve the highest level when you move from this world to the next, you do absolutely have a pretty high bar that you have to live up to. And it's going to be easier for some than it is for others. And for some, it's going to be damn near impossible. And if oddly enough, the book of Matthew has a wonderful example of this. Matthew 19:16-26. Now a man came up to Jesus and asked, "Teacher, what good thing must I do to get eternal life?" "Why do you ask me about what is good?" Jesus replied. "There is only one who is good. If you want to enter if you want eternal life, obey the commandments." "Which ones?" the man inquired. Jesus replied, "Do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give false testimony. Honor your father and mother, and love your neighbor as yourself." "All these I have kept," the young man said. "What do I still lack?" Jesus answered, "If you want to be perfect, go, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me." When the man heard this, he went away sad, because he had great wealth. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "I tell you the truth, it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Again I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God." When the disciples heard this, they were greatly astonished and asked, "Who then can be saved?" Jesus looked at them and said, With man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." Once more, it's a beautiful message to show that anything is possible. When you take that path of God, that path which I currently define of love of all things, love of just existence in general, love of all people's paths, and recognizing them for what exactly they are. Everybody's path is valid in their own right. Whether it serves as a counter-example for the true path, or if it serves as a stronger example for the correct path. Ultimately, the path to God is that of unconditional love, which is the love that all these different faiths teach. And all these different faiths contradict themselves when they say that, God will come down and smite you if you're doing the wrong thing, but he's a forgiving and very loving God. And I think the message is lost when you start trying to focus on that part that says you're going to be punished for your actions, which it isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just means that there's consequences to what you do. But it provides that message that there is always a chance for salvation. There is always a chance to get on the correct path. There is always a chance to fall towards love. There is always a chance to find that path. And no one is beyond redemption. So, that being said, relating to that idea of physical possessions, a number of people, and with this story there's a bit of trickery in it too, because a number of people would argue that the man has the wealth because of God's good graces. Whatever he has done in this lifetime, he has done to have God reward him with that great wealth. But the reason it's a problem is when there's an attachment to it. And the Christian faith isn't the only one that teaches this. In fact, a number of faiths, and Buddhism in particular, which I'm a big fan of, teaches that you need to let go of worldly attachments in any shape or form that they take. This can come in physical possessions. It can come in relationships. Can manifest in a number of different ways. Um, but when you are attached to anything and you refuse to let it go, you will not allow for the natural process of things to continue. It goes with that saying, if you truly love something, set it free. If it comes back to you, it is yours. If it doesn't come back, it was never truly yours to begin with. And I very much love that saying because it's very, very true in all things. Because when you hold on to things and you refuse to let them go, you interrupt that natural process of change. And everything goes in cycles, and you can't restrict that flow because otherwise you're going to see problems not only around you but in you as well. I'll give a couple examples. Well, I'll give one particular example from my own life, and then I'll give one that's a bit more society-based. In particular, I've talked about these little guys before, crystals. I have a very much fascination with them, and I'm very fond of all of my crystals. But I don't hold an attachment to any of them. And it was funny because when I was first getting into it, that was a point that I found was made very, very clear. It is the crystals will come and go as they please. And many people described crystals disappearing some days and reappearing days, weeks, or months later. Others, people gift and they never see them again. Sometimes crystals just vanish and never to be seen again. But that was very much an idea that was present when I got into it, and it's something that I've experienced as well. For me, I've obtained all the crystals I have through my own efforts. I bought them with my own money. I picked out a number of them and charged them with my own energy and picked them out by hand. But my collection has already shrunk by a few, just in the number of weeks that I've had the collection that I do, because just some of them I felt compelled to let go of. And it's because I've opened myself up to be receptive to those cues of when to let them go that I was able to do so, and I had a very positive outcome because of it. One in particular I gave to this woman at Southwest who helped me out when I was in a tricky spot, and my flight got redirected to a different airport, and then I was stuck in a completely different city with nowhere to stay. And she ended up being very, very helpful because I was very calm, relaxed, and I wasn't yelling at her or anything like a number of other people were. And she helped get me situated, which then led to other experiences. I met other new people who actually furthered a bit of research that I was doing, and it was a great experience. But right after she had helped me out, I just immediately reached into my pocket and I pulled out the small bag I had with my crystals, and there was one of them that was in a gate stone that I had, and it absolutely said to me, "It's time to go." So I took it out, handed it to the woman, and I described to her a bit of what the crystal was and what she could use it for, and then I went on my way. And then I had another day where I was just walking down the street, I had my headphones in, and I passed a guy on the street who was asking for change, and I took a couple steps past him. I immediately stopped in my tracks, and I had felt a sensation in my pocket. And I pulled out the bag. Again, it was in a gate stone. It's been a common theme lately, actually. And I turned around and I said, "Look, I don't have any change with me, but I do in fact have this crystal." And then I described to him the properties of it, and I wished him as much positive energy as I could, and then I went on my way. But I didn't have any attachment to them, so when the time came that they gave me the signal that it was time to go, I just let them go. And it wasn't a problem. It didn't really mind that I had spent money on them and I was just giving them away for free. It was time to let them go. They had served their purpose for me, and that was it. And I've stretched this to a number of things in my life, but for a more practical approach, for those of you who aren't too convinced of the tapping into those different signals and the energies, take a look at our financial system in the United States. Right now, you work through your own energy and effort to get a paycheck. Then you go home, use that paycheck to pay a number of different bills: insurance, food, clothing, entertainment, um, all sorts of other things. And all that money goes out to all these different people, and then they in turn go home and use it for the same type of things. They use it to pay all these various bills that they have. Sometimes they save it for other things later on down the road, but it becomes a process of, I get a bit and now I use it to get other things. And the energy transfers and cycles in those many different forms in those many different ways. Now, if we look in particular at the big crash that we recently had, that was a number of people who were very attached to the wealth, and they did everything they could to amass as much of it as possible and keep it to themselves. Now, notice what happened when this big attachment became or manifested into the reality was that it caused a massive number of problems. It stopped the whole proper flow of everything, and it absolutely ruined a number of people's lives. It caused so much negativity, but it's also provided a big lesson for a lot of us to learn in this day and age, which one I think is to lose that attachment to money and don't be as fixated on it as many of us are, and two, to recognize those who do have those attachments, and quite frankly, we need to get them out of those positions where they can keep doing that. Because if they're in the positions where they can do it, they're going to continue to do so until they themselves develop further, but that's going to be a whole nother issue for another day. But that's part of the cycle of things, and when you stop that cycle, whether it's on a larger scale, like the financial process, or if it's on a smaller scale with just you in general with anything in your life, when you have any kind of attachment, it's going to cause problems. Now, attachment aren't necessarily a bad thing because it does create an appreciation, and it gives a lot of different things a lot of worth. Because it's that, in that sense, it's what exactly is your price. It is, how attached are you to this? What amount of value do you have in this object? And, you know, is it worth more than anything in the world to you? Is it, you know, worth a very, very high amount? Is it worth something very small? And in that sense, when somebody says everybody has their price, is that at some point the attachment to it will be let go for some kind of exchange. Now, for me personally, I find a lot of value in internal peace that comes with a lack of attachment. I have a number of things in my room right now. I can see notebooks, my lamp, my crystals, food, textbooks, stuffed animals, blankets, clothes, all sorts of stuff. And I recognize all of them as tools that I'm currently using and things that I will one day let go of. And when you look at the story and you see that you should just give up the worldly possessions, you don't have to give them all up right now and go live that life of poverty. But when you don't hold those attachments, you're not going to be fixated on keeping them, and you're not going to go through all that negative hassle of eventually letting go of them. Whether it is that you never let go of them until your death, or you learn to let go of them in the process of things, is up to you. But it's the attachments to them cause a lot of different problems. Now, I bring this up in particular because I believe that a number of people have an attachment to the religious institutions and the religious texts. Now, as I said, when you hold attachments to things and refuse to let them go, this causes problems. It stagnates, it prevents change, and a number of issues start coming up. When you block the natural flow, things are going to build up behind it, and that's going to cause issues on the back burner and in the forward moving on. So it causes a number of different problems. Now, I bring this up because I see that many people, in my perspective, have an attachment to these institutions, an attachment to these religious texts, that they refuse to let them go and let them change into something so much more. Again, there might be certain purposes behind it, but anything that restricts the flow of change, I see as something that definitely needs to be adjusted. Because I truly believe the only constant in the universe is change. So, taking a look at the institution again, it was created by man for the purposes of serving man. And people asked for it, so they received. So, again, people brought this thing into existence, and I believe that they're having a hard time letting it go. And people can sometimes, even when it was good intentioned, can fall back into the cycle that they were trying to get out of in the first place. Remember how I brought up the passage about Saul being king? Again, people asked, they received, but then they're being asked to be led. They're being asked to have someone direct them for them rather than taking their own path. Take a look at the American Revolution. The colonies had just fought a war to get out of the rule of a tyrant king across the seas. And then the second the war was over, they turned to their great leader, Washington, and they said, George Washington, we want to make you our king. Lucky for them and lucky for us now in the States, he was an amazing man who recognized that flaw and said, no, I'm not going to do that. And that was a big choice that inevitably made the United States into what it is today. But it's, again, when you try and have someone lead you, when you try and have somebody lead you without trying to learn from the mistakes of the past and simply repeating and putting back old systems in place, it's going to be a repeat of history. And as the saying goes, those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And again, the problem is people don't want to lead themselves. I understand that it can be very, very hard at times to find that correct path. It's very hard to, in a number of ways, to think for yourself, to interpret for yourself, to struggle with those big questions on your own. And if you've never read The Grand Inquisitor, I encourage you to, as soon as this video is over, look it up, bookmark whatever page you find it on, and then whenever you have time, go and read it, because it is a beautiful, beautiful story that talks about exactly this, that a lot of people in their nature will succumb to what is easier, which is to have the answer given to them. And during the Grand Inquisitor, the Inquisitor himself starts bringing up that quality of human nature, and then Christ comes back to remind people of their free will, remind them that they can think for themselves and choose what they want to do. And the Inquisitor ends up trying to prove the point to Christ of they won't follow you because the free will you're offering them is more than they can handle. So when I can give them what they need, they will follow me with whatever I tell them. And again, it's a bit of a hard read, I'll warn you now, but if you can get through it and you really, really read it, even read a few interpretations on it, you'll see that message that, it is hard. It is very, very hard at first to learn how to think for yourself, interpret for yourself, and all that. But when it becomes part of who you are, it becomes second nature, and you'll wonder why you never did it in the first place. But again, I recognize that from a perspective of going from a path where everything is given to you and then a path where you now have to figure it out on your own, it's a big change. But it's change that I truly feel that everybody needs to go through at some point or another. Look at the Native American culture. That was very much ingrained into them was, you're going to grow up based on a core set of values that we all hold true, that are going to prevent you from making a lot of other mistakes. And then when the time comes, you come of age, it's time for you to find your own path, because that's not for us to figure out for you. We give you the tools you need to survive out there on your own, and then it's up to you. And that's the process of growing up. That's the nature of free will. That is what I feel is the purpose of all of our existences. We grow up and sometimes we're not given all the tools to get through it all. But that in turn becomes part of the learning process, and that becomes the beauty of it, because when you treat everything as that learning experience, gaining that knowledge, gaining that perspective, gaining that new way of thinking, gaining those new way of interpretations, when you take it all in as you go through the process, at that point, you're on the correct path, and it'll lead to so much better outcomes, not only for yourself, but for all of us as a whole. So, but I truly think that's the purpose of free will, and that is the beautiful gift of creation, is that you get to choose. You know, it's equally valid to choose the path of having that information given to you and you not having to worry about it. Because for some people, there are other things in their life that they need to worry about, and if they don't have to struggle with those big questions, all right. But I still feel it's a part of themselves at some point or another they need to address. And remember what I said before about the best contributions to any single faith are those who have struggled with those big questions, struggled with those big issues. And those are the people that give beautiful interpretations of it, because the interpretation is their own. It has similar qualities to the structure religion itself, but that interpretation is their own. They have their own way of looking at it, their own beautiful way of putting it. And it is just so amazing to me. And it's so... it leads to so much more of a more positive and a much happier existence when you can find that own interpretation, that own path that works for you. And the reason I say that in particular is, and this was a very clever way of putting it that I came across in these last couple days, which is why I waited to do this until now, was that it seems that it's within nature itself, part of this intelligent design, that all forms and all presentations of knowledge have intrinsically a bit of truth to them. Now, each and every form is going to have flaws and holes in it, and I feel that's the point where you kind of fall back on faith. But it encourages cooperation in that sense, because when you can recognize that all interpretations, all takes have a bit of truth to them, and you start taking those little bits and pieces from all those different sources, and everybody starts working together to combine, to collect everybody else's pieces, and you can put together this wonderful, beautiful, holistic picture on what all of it truly is, what it all truly means. And not only from that perspective can you find what path works best for you, but then it creates an acceptance and an admiration and appreciation for all those different religions, all those different paths that other people take, and you recognize the beauty in each and every one of them. And to me, it's just amazing, because that's truly the path of love, is finding all of that beauty in all of those spaces, whether they be inherently positive, negative, or neither. And it's just all so amazing, all so beautiful when you put it all together. But again, you have to be open-minded. You have to learn to interpret things in different ways, see the new ideas, incorporate them into the belief systems. You don't have to shatter the faith itself. You just might have to tweak it a bit. And there's nothing wrong with that. Because in time, then it'll lead for, false teachings of old to evolve into something so much more wonderful. And it allows us all to grow and develop into so many other beautiful and so much better and more positive outcomes. It's just all so amazing. And it goes along with the idea of to know everything is to know nothing, and to know nothing is to know everything. When you think you have all the answers and you refuse to change any of those established beliefs, that is the point where you know nothing. And that is the point where you stop growing and developing, and I truly believe that is the day you die. But when you're open to those new ideas, when you're open to the idea that you truly don't know what the answer is, you truly, you're not going to know it all right now. But that's okay. You don't have to. Because life will provide those new takes, those new perspectives, those new ideas, those new experiences that will shape and adjust your beliefs as you go, however and in whichever way that it needs to be presented to you in order to get those changes, or it may help strengthen other beliefs. And that's why I encourage the debate with all of these videos, is because even now I still know, even from being able to stand at a very holistic perspective and seeing all of these different bits and pieces of knowledge, I still recognize I don't have all the information. I don't know it all. And I very much could still have it wrong. And when I invite all of those different perspectives in, it helps me grow and develop more. And then I can start providing even better perspectives, which then I can use to help you guys even more. And then the process just continues. Again, it's that cooperation of when I better myself, I can then better help you better yourself, which then increases the positivity between the both of us, and then we're both in a better state. So now we can continue going with the back and forth, helping others, increasing their positive energy, so then they in turn can turn back and help us increase ours. And then it creates this wonderful cooperative cycle that when we're all working together to do it, like I said, it's like nature intelligently knows that once we're all at that state where we all recognize that that is the path, when we all recognize that that is the way to go about things, it will allow for so much more of a brighter future, for us to accomplish so much more, and it will remove so much pain and suffering that is in the world. And this I truly, truly believe. And it's why I'm so optimistic for the future, because I recognize that we all have this potential. And it frustrates me so much when people don't see it, or they remain, at the very least, closed-minded to the idea that it exists. Now, as, again, another point of clarification, I want to say at no point should you immediately abandon whatever it is your current faith is. You merely need to be open to the idea that you could be wrong. But in the end, it simply doesn't matter. Let's say, for the sake of argument, and again, not saying this is the case, but for the sake of argument, let's say that Christ wasn't truly the Son of God. He wasn't truly the Messiah. He was just a prophet in a number of senses. Does it matter? Does it change the good that people do with his teachings? Does it invalidate the fully happy and righteous lives that people live underneath that assumingly false truth? Does it matter? And I hope you guys can figure it out by now, but if you still don't, the answer is no. It doesn't matter. Because that's the nature of spirituality. It's that interpretation, that belief system, those habits, those rituals that you go through, whether it's prayer, whether it's, spell circles, whether it's crystals, whether it's, just a personal philosophy on how you should live, and you completely eliminate the existence of God altogether. It's all up to you. And when you find that interpretation of spirituality, that explanation that works best for you, so long as you are living a happy and positive existence, I see no reason why any explanation should be any more valid or invalid than another. Now, that being said, you also need to remain accepting of that idea, because when you find the path that works for you, also understand that other people are doing the same. Other people are finding other paths, and for every person there is a different interpretation, a different take on that which is unknown. And in each and every one of their own rights, they sound a bit crazy. Channels saying that they are having another entity talk through them sound crazy. Christians sound a bit crazy, saying this guy was the Son of God and he rose from the dead after 3 days, and he, turning the bread into his flesh and the wine into blood. And in their own right, every religion and every faith sounds a bit crazy. That's just part of it, because we can't prove it, and that's the bit of craziness in it. But there's nothing wrong with a bit of crazy, because as we hear from Lewis Carroll, all the best people are. And it's just amazing when you can truly dream up of these impossible things, these impossible explanations that tie together the beauty and the majesty that truly is existence. It's finding that one that works for you and then letting it flow through you with everything you have, and then adjust it as you need to. Because there's going to be flaws in every belief system. There's going to be flaws. There's going to be problems that are caused by those belief systems. But as long as you're open and willing to change as those new bits of information, those new experiences come into play, then that's the correct path. And it doesn't matter if yours is the God of Abraham, it's the flying spaghetti monster, if it's an alien from another planet. It doesn't matter. And when you understand that, you almost immediately become accepting of all different takes. And I absolutely believe it is your duty to go out and spread the word of God. Spread your interpretation. Spread what explanation works best for you. Because it's in sharing that information that we all start getting a bigger, a more whole picture on what exactly existence is. It's such a beautiful thing when you can take the knowledge in all things and recognize the validity and truth in all that is, because then it opens you up to the love and the light of everything in existence. And it's just such a beautiful reality when you find that path that works for you. And that is the main message that I want to get across with this video in particular. Just remain open-minded. Find that path that works for you, and then follow it with everything you have. Follow it with all the love and passion that you can put into it, because it'll lead to so many wonderful things. And it'll just bridge some beautiful connections and allow for such beautiful takes on reality that other people have to come in, and you'll find new experiences and new ways of thinking that you never in your wildest dreams could have conceived of, but still tells a very beautiful and equally powerful story. So, again, thank you guys for listening. I really hope you get something out of this, and that last message, if anything, is the core thing I want to emphasize with anything that I talk about. It is finding that explanation that works for you, and finding that which brings the most happiness and the most positive energy in your life. So, as always, I wish you guys the best. Good luck, my friends, my brothers, and my sisters. Namaste.